Mysteries in the Elevator. In January 2003, my friends and I decided to explore the World Social Forum in Victory City, a trip planned for a week full of activities and new experiences. We chose to stay at an acquaintance's apartment, located in an old building in the heart of the city. What seemed to be just a cultural trip soon turned into something more mysterious and unsettling. The building where we stayed was a historical landmark, with wooden walls that whispered secrets of a distant past. The atmosphere of the place was peculiar, almost as if, upon crossing its threshold, we entered a parallel dimension. The two old wooden elevators were particularly notable, producing strange noises that we initially attributed to the age of the machinery. During our stay, none of us suffered from claustrophobia, but each trip in the elevators made us feel an almost palpable discomfort, as if the air became heavier and harder to breathe. One night, we needed to replenish our beer supply, and at 3 a.m, two friends and I ventured out to find some place still open. On the way back, something extraordinary happened. We entered the elevator on the right, the same one that awaited us on the ground floor, while on the way down we had used the left one. I pressed the button for the 7th floor, but time passed and we did not reach our destination. Counting the floors we passed, we realized something was wrong when we surpassed the 10th floor. Inexplicably, the elevator stopped on the 16th floor. A deathly silence took over the space as we exchanged confused and frightened looks. Soon after, we heard the sound of another motor. The elevator on the left, which had also stopped on the same floor, opened its doors. No one was there to operate it. We hurried out of our elevator and ran down the stairs to the 7th floor, stunned by what had happened. In the following days, the mystery of the elevators continued to haunt us, for even during the night, they seemed to operate on their own. Unexpected sounds frequently broke the silence, disturbing our sleep. Curious and somewhat apprehensive, we decided to talk to the owner of the bar where we had coffee. With a grave and knowing look, he revealed that the building used to function as a hotel and told the tragic story of a dedicated employee, in charge of maintaining the elevators. One day, during an adjustment, this man fell from the 16th floor, in a gruesome accident that marked the end of the hotel era. Since then, rumors about supernatural occurrences and inexplicable coincidences had surrounded the old building. Despite trying to attribute our experiences to mere coincidences, the doubt remained, leading us to opt for the stairs for the rest of our stay. The truth may never be fully unveiled, but the shadow of those events continues to echo in our memories, a constant reminder that some places hold more than just stories. They hold secrets that defy our understanding. About a year ago, we experienced an event that still resonates in our memories with a mix of awe and comfort. Mary, a very dear friend, went through a devastating time with the death of her granddaughter, Emma, a child of only 3 years. The loss was a hard blow for all of us, especially for Mary, who shared an unbreakable bond with the little one. To offer some comfort to Mary in this difficult time, we invited her to stay with us before heading to the funeral, which would take place 200 kilometers away. During her stay, she found some relief playing with my daughter, Lucy, who at the time was 2 years old, and talking at length with me. One unexpected morning, Lucy woke up much earlier than usual, around 5 o'clock. She seemed restless and immediately called me, insisting that I accompany her to the kitchen to prepare her breakfast. Still sleepy, I served her a glass of milk and bread with butter. I was almost dozing off at the table when Lucy, with a serious expression, said something that chilled me. "Mommy. She's in my room." Confused, I asked, "Who, dear?" Lucy replied, pointing to her room, "Mommy, she's in my bed. She wants a toy." I looked into the room but saw no one. Trying to stay calm, I suggested, "Well, dear, it's good to share our things." Lucy then insisted, specifying the desired toy, "Mommy, she wants that toy." She was pointing to a doll on the high shelf in the room. With a mix of hesitation and curiosity, I handed the doll to Lucy, who promptly placed it in her bed and came back to me, smiling. In the following days, I observed Lucy talking, playing, and sharing her toys and books with an invisible friend. I couldn't see or hear this other child, but everything indicated that Emma, Mary's granddaughter, had found a way to connect with Lucy, perhaps to convey some peace to her grandmother through our little one. When I shared this experience with Mary, I hoped to bring her some comfort, and indeed it did. She seemed to find some serenity in the idea that Emma was still around in some way, caring for and playing with Lucy. Mary became visibly calmer after hearing about these events. This episode reinforced in me the belief that children have a special sensitivity, a connection to the spiritual world that we, as adults, often lose. Therefore, whenever a child reports seeing something we cannot see, we should listen carefully. They might be seeing far beyond what our eyes are capable of. Last summer, I took advantage of the vacation to visit my aunt's partner's farm, located in the countryside of Michigan, specifically in the area of Johns Creek, a place I had frequented since childhood. The farm, which had been in his family since the late 19th century, was a vast land full of old stories and secrets. This time, my young and adventurous spirit was not content with just relaxing by the pool or horseback riding. I was determined to explore every corner of that vast property. After much insistence, my cousin Mike agreed to accompany me. Despite my eagerness for adventure, I did not know the area as well as he did. We set out on our exploration right after breakfast. Far from the main house, Mike suggested a visit to the old farm headquarters, a place I had never visited before. The building, although not as imposing as I imagined, carried the weight of centuries in its worn walls and its slightly open door. We entered the house with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. The first thing that caught my attention were the walls of the main hall, scratched and stained with something that looked like blood, although Mike suggested it could just be old paint. He confessed that despite his frequent visits to the property, he had never seen those marks before. We explored further, passing through the dining room and following the corridor that led to the bedrooms. The first and second bedrooms were as expected, filled only with dust and oblivion. However, as we entered the last room, the largest of all, we were greeted by an unexpected cold breeze. A chill enveloped us despite the muggy heat of summer. Inside that room, there was an old wardrobe. Driven by curiosity, we opened it to see if there was anything inside, but it was empty. That was when we heard footsteps in the corridor. The sound of the footsteps approached, stopping abruptly in front of the room's door. We looked at each other, astonished, and seeing no one, decided to flee from there. We ran out of the house into the comforting light of the sun. Still panting, Mike began to scream in pain. I looked at his arm and saw red marks quickly appearing, as if something was burning him from the inside out. Without wasting time, I ran with him back to the main house, where his mother immediately took us to the hospital. The doctors treated Mike with anti-allergic medication, and incredibly, by the next day, he was completely recovered. We discussed the incident that night during dinner, hypothesizing about what could have happened. My aunt's partner, worried about the possibility of someone hiding on the property, decided to investigate the old house the next day. We accompanied him, but Mike and I did not go beyond the main room. To our surprise, the walls were intact, without any sign of the marks we had seen the day before. A thorough search confirmed that no one else besides us had entered the house. This experience taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers and mysteries that old places can hide. The sight of that gray smoke in the shape of a person at the door and Mike's sudden allergic reaction were more than enough to dissuade me from future explorations. Even today, the memory of that adventure gives me chills, reinforcing the idea that some mysteries are better left at rest. When John and his family moved to a newly acquired house in Austin, inexplicable events soon began to be part of their daily lives. However, one occurrence in particular surpassed all others in strangeness and dread. His son, Ethan, had a rubber ball, the kind that bounces high when thrown to the ground, which was his favorite toy. Every day, he played with it in the backyard, throwing it against the wall and catching it on its return. One summer afternoon, Ethan stored the ball in a box in his room along with other toys and went to dinner. Days later, when he looked for it to play, the ball had disappeared without a trace. Ethan searched every corner of the house, but like every child, soon lost interest and forgot about the ball. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, John was alone at home, climbing the stairs to the office when something hit him in the back. Turning around, to his surprise and horror, he saw Ethan's ball rolling down the hallway, as if it had been thrown by someone. John examined every corner in search of a logical explanation, but found nothing. It was undeniable. The ball had been thrown at his back by unknown forces. Intrigued and a little frightened, John began to investigate the history of the house. After consulting old records and speaking with older neighbors, he discovered a tragic story. Decades ago, the house was home to an extremely reclusive family who had a single child. This boy lived under strict surveillance by his parents, who never allowed him to go out or have contact with the outside world, keeping his existence virtually a secret. According to reports, this child had a lonely life and eventually died young under mysterious circumstances within the house itself. The revelation led John to believe that perhaps the boy's spirit still inhabited the house, perhaps looking for company or trying to communicate through the few objects he could manipulate, like Ethan's ball. This idea, although disturbing, brought a new perspective on the strange events occurring in the house and a deeper understanding of the importance of knowing the history of the places we call home. On a cold winter morning on an isolated farm near Salem, I lazily tossed and turned in bed, trying to muster the courage to face the day. That's when I realized that my friend Michael, who was spending the holidays with me, had already left the room. As I was getting up, Michael appeared in the door with a look of boredom. "So? What do you want to do today?" "I'm completely bored," he said, clearly in need of an adventure. Still rubbing my eyes to adjust to the light, I suggested, "How about we take the ATV for a spin?" His face lit up with a grin from ear to ear. "Sounds great." We dressed in heavy clothes suitable for the cold and for exploring the forest when my mother entered the room, curious. "Where are you boys going?" "We're going to explore the area," I replied. She insisted that we have breakfast before leaving, which we did quickly before heading to the garage to get the ATV. The air was chilly, and a light fog hovered over the forest, giving the environment a mysterious and somewhat gloomy air. As we progressed along the dirt trail, we noticed that the forest seemed abnormally silent, as if all wildlife had been scared away by something sinister. The deeper we ventured into the forest, the darker it seemed to get, despite it still being morning. Suddenly, something abruptly fell in front of us, making me brake the ATV violently. A large tree branch had fallen just inches from us. "Are you okay?" Michael asked. That was close. "I'm fine, but did you see the size of that branch?" I responded, still shaken. We continued our way, and the trail became narrower and less defined. I had never gone this far before and had no idea where we were. That's when we spotted an old two-story cabin, looking like it had been abandoned for decades. The porch was collapsed, and the main door was boarded up. "Come on, Steve, let's take a look." Michael insisted, excited about the discovery. "I don't know, man, it doesn't even look like a real cabin, more like a termite mound." I replied hesitantly. "Come on, man, the cabin's solid." "Let's just take a look," he persuaded me, and somewhat reluctantly, I agreed to explore the place. We entered through a window, and the interior was surprisingly solid despite its decrepit appearance. The ground floor was divided into two parts. One area appeared to be a combination of kitchen and living room, with walls covered in old newspapers and a collapsed fireplace. We climbed a partially destroyed spiral staircase to explore the upstairs, which consisted of a single stuffy and dusty room. An old mattress was thrown in a corner, and there was a dark hole in the wall, large enough for us to pass through. Suddenly, we heard footsteps on the floor below. What was that? Michael whispered nervously. "I think there's someone here." I responded, my heart racing with fear of the unknown. Silently, we pointed to the hole in the wall as our escape route. We snuck through the tight space, the stifling air making it hard to breathe. Inside, we began to hear whispers and footsteps growing louder and closer, as panic rose within us. Suddenly, the entire structure began to shake, as if an earthquake was shaking the old cabin. When the trembling stopped and silence settled, I crawled out first, followed closely by Michael, who screamed when he saw something inside the hole. "There's something in there." "I saw it," he exclaimed, terrified. We ran out of the cabin and mounted the ATV, speeding back to the safety of the farm. My mother greeted us with concern, noting our shaken and dirty state. We told her about the cabin, but left out the scariest details, fearing she wouldn't believe us. To this day, Michael and I occasionally discuss that day. He confessed to me that while alone in the hole, he felt what seemed like a human hand touching his leg. That experience convinced us that there is more between heaven and earth than we can comprehend, and that the paranormal might indeed be very real. The memory of that morning in the haunted cabin remains vivid in our minds, a constant reminder that the world is full of mysteries still waiting to be discovered. This time, it seemed everything would be different, at least that's what I hoped. Yet, I found myself in a complicated situation again. No money, no job, and now living in a remote and truly spooky shack, exactly the opposite of what I wanted for my life. This unusual journey began when I decided to leave the hustle and bustle of the metropolis for good. I have always detested urban chaos, although I often found myself forced to migrate to major centers in search of livelihood. This frank and authentic narrative describes how I ended up in a haunted house. It was isolated, with the nearest neighbor about 5 kilometers away. With the arrival of summer, I was determined to leave the metropolis of Phoenix. After an exhaustive search, I landed a position as a sound engineer at a radio station in a small town in Arizona, located 30 kilometers from the almost deserted valley where I intended to settle. I arrived at the station beaming. After initial introductions and a brief explanation of my responsibilities, I headed to my favorite valley. Initially, everything seemed perfect. Having friends from previous stays in the region, I thought of staying with them while I found my own space. However, after 2 weeks, the situation at the radio station deteriorated. They decided they did not need a full-time technician, but this did not shake my hopes of finding another job and staying in the area. I had visited several available rental houses, but none pleased me. Then I reconnected with an old friend, John, and his newlywed wife. He was also looking for a place to live and suggested some options I had not considered. He described an old 2-story farmhouse with 6 bedrooms, including barns and stables. The property was 15 kilometers from the nearest town, accessible by a little used road. The rent was cheap, $75 a month, as the owner offered a discount in exchange for repairs, according to John. My excitement only grew until his wife mentioned that the house was known to be haunted. Despite the surprise, I decided to visit the place. It was a warm summer afternoon, and the coolness of the air, with the mountains in the background, gave a special charm to the property. The wood of the porch was rotten, a reminder of years of abandonment. John had warned me to use the back entrance, so I headed to the kitchen, imagining life on a farm. However, encountering a broken faucet that wouldn't stop leaking was just the beginning of a visit full of surprises. The kitchen was spacious, with tall glass cabinets and a cold pantry next door. Exploring the living room, which was even larger, and the corridor leading to the bedrooms, each detail increased my anxiety to move in. After exploring the ground floor, I went upstairs to check out the upper floor. The corridor connected a small storage room full of materials to a room decorated in colonial style. At the end of the corridor, a closed door led to a recently renovated room. But upon entering, an uncomfortable feeling overcame me. Although everything seemed perfect, I felt as if I was being watched. I discovered a hole covered with plastic, which seemed to be a passage to the attic. Removing the plastic, I thought I saw eyes in the darkness. Strange sounds and the sensation of presence only intensified my discomfort. Quickly, I replaced the plastic and left the room, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched as I walked away, enchanted and at the same time disturbed by the house. I returned to the kitchen, left the house, and walked about 30 meters away, admiring the landscape and imagining life on that isolated farm. But again, I felt as if I was being watched. The gaze seemed to come from an air vent on the side of the house, where the original floor's lining was. The sensation was so strong that I could not ignore it. I returned to town trying to forget the dark side of my visit, focusing only on the positive aspects of the place. However, I hesitated to move there alone, so I put the idea aside for a while. A few days later, I received a phone call. My brother Mark and a friend of his were on their way to visit me. Mark had always wanted to move to the countryside, and this was our chance to finally do it. He and his friend planned to spend the summer with me, and Mark agreed to share the rent for the farmhouse. We talked to the owner and soon moved my furniture, stored since my last attempt to live in the region, to the farmhouse. I chose one of the rooms on the ground floor, close to the bathroom. The first nights were quiet, but soon my brother and his friend gave up staying, unable to find a job, and returned to the city. Thus, I was left alone in the huge house, which I suspected was haunted. Noises began around 11 p.m. At first, they sounded like scratches on the walls. Then I heard heavy footsteps upstairs, as if someone was dragging something through the strange room. I played loud music to drown out the noises, but they persisted every night. A few weeks later, I talked to my friend Pete, who also wanted to escape the big city. I offered him one of the rooms, and he readily accepted, choosing one on the lower floor, near the stairs. The next morning, Pete questioned me about the noises he had heard above his room during the night. I insisted that I hadn't gone upstairs, and when showing him the place, he realized that there was only the lining above. Together, we concluded that there was a ghost in the house. Pete stayed for 2 weeks, then left, leaving me alone again. Later, I met a friend in town who reinforced the house's haunted reputation, telling stories of a family that held seance sessions there, and who left emotionally debilitated. The noises upstairs intensified so much that I planned an escape through the window. One night, waiting for a phone call, the noises were so loud that I could barely hear the phone. My friends noticed my tension on the phone, but nothing else happened that night. Forced to return to Phoenix due to lack of stable employment, I left my furniture in the house with the owner's permission. Months later, upon returning, I talked to the new tenant, a former police officer, who reported similar experiences and even a sighting. 2 years later, I passed by the house again with friends. After a friend's prayer, everything inside the house began to vibrate. We fled to the car and found a viscous substance on the doorknob. I never approached that house again.